Well, we're delighted to have each and every person here today. Thank you for coming. If you have your Bibles, open up to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, we'll get there in a little bit. Now, Kevin is going to announce again, I'm sure, and you'll hear it repeatedly, about the new members' fish fry and pig roast. Some of you have not been attending those. Now, it's for everybody. It's not just for new members. It's for everybody, and it's a wonderful time for us to get together. And I would love to see just a huge crowd here for that. It'll be a time of fellowship and good food and fun. And I know that there are some that are working hard on making that happen. And so go ahead and put that on your calendar as a must-do thing. Because it's just going to be good, and you being here will make it a lot better. Matthew chapter 6. I'm sure you've heard this statement before. I would go to church, but the church is full of hypocrites. Or the reason I don't go to church is that the church is filled with hypocrites. Now, I don't think there's anybody here that would deny that there are hypocrites in the church. Now, there may not be any in this church, but there are hypocrites in churches. There's no doubt about that. And in Hollywood, and I'm not blaming all of the ills upon facing the church or all the struggles facing the church on Hollywood, but Hollywood is not helping portray the church in a positive light. Whenever you see a show made, and Leanne and I have been watching this series on Netflix, and the Christians that are represented there tend to be hypocritical, or their faith is real shallow and they're willing to throw it away just like that. And it's really a frustrating process. Now, that's not the main line to the story, but it's pretty apparent that they want to portray Christians in that light. And a lot of times, if the preacher is present in the show, he is pretty much a dunce and dealing rather harshly with people. And yet, back behind that is an evil life, more evil than the people that the preacher may be condemning in whatever movie or show you're talking about. That's not always the case, but it happens far too many times. Now, as I say, we're not going to deny that there are hypocrites in the church. But here is a truth. Just because there are hypocrites in the church does not devalue the church. Nor does it take away the validity of the message preached by the church. You see, the church exists in this world for a very noble purpose. In fact, it is the most noble purpose. The church exists in this world to glorify God. We gather to worship. And if there were to be a hypocrite sitting beside you, you still ought to be able to worship the Creator of this universe. The church exists to evangelize, to seek and to save the lost. And as far as I know, that includes every person that is of right mind that has reached the age of accountability. Every one of us sin. The hypocrite sitting beside you or the hypocrite sitting in front of you, he's a sinner, but so are you. And the only one that has the power to save is Jesus. And let me tell you what Jesus feels about the church. He purchased it with His blood. Did He know that there were going to be people that claimed to be a part of His church that were fakes? Of course He did. But He adds every one of the saved to the church. He doesn't say, I'm not going to take this saved person now and keep them away from the church. He adds them to the church. The church is described as the body of Christ. The church is described as the bride of Christ. He loves it. Now, the message of the church is, or the purpose of the church is to evangelize the lost. You got hypocrites. It still does not take away from the validity or of our duty to evangelize the world. Now, we also point out, and it's kind of sounds weak when you're saying it to a person who's making the argument that the reason they don't attend church and glorify God is because they're hypocrites. We point out that there are hypocrites in every area of life. Now, it's been a long time ago, but I worked in a factory. I actually worked in a couple of factories. One time I worked in 2 factories at once. But back in the long ago, and y'all tell me if it's changed, back in the long ago, whenever I was working in a factory, I would go in and work with people, and I enjoyed most of the people I worked with, but there were some that was just hard to enjoy because, you see, they were terrible workers until the boss came around. The Bible talks about those people giving eye service. When the boss is around, boy, they dig in and they just play up, and they're the nicest person in the factory or wherever the workplace. They're just brimming over with joy. But let the boss go away and they're cantankerous and can't get along with anybody and don't do much of anything. So if we take that approach that I'm not going to be a part of something because there's hypocrites, there would be few places that you could work in this world. Because you're going to find, and by the way, football's coming up. I'm so excited. I just can't hardly stand myself, and I'm not talking about pro, I'm talking about college. But if you were to apply that rule, none of you could sit and go to a football stadium and watch a football game or a basketball game, for those who care about that sport. You couldn't go to an arena and sit because you're going to be sitting in the midst of a few hypocrites. So if there are hypocrites in the church, remember there's also a bunch of hypocrites in the world. But the truth of the matter is we don't want to be a hypocrite either way. And there's something else that we need to consider. I found this thought profound, and I'd like to say it's original, but there's really been few original thoughts in the last 2,000 years. Somebody oftentimes points out this old mean, cantankerous church member. Now, we don't have any of those here, but I've known a few. That they just are sour as soured milk. I mean, they just got this mean look on their face. They don't seem happy about anything, and they're glad to complain about everything. I wish that were not the case, but there are Christian people like that. There are Christian people who are judgmental. I wish that were not the case, and I know that I battled that in my own life. I wish that were not the case, but people will point them out, and then they will point out a person that has never gone to church in their life, and they're a really good person. I mean, are we going to deny that there are some really good people out in the world that's never been to church? If we're going to deny that, we're not being fair or true. Because I've known some wonderful people that in no way were connected with church. And so people point this bad Christian and point them out and say, look, this person over here is a much better person than this person over here. Well, there's something that you ought to consider. Can you imagine what that old mean person would be like if they didn't know Jesus? Man, they might be impossible to put up with. And have you ever considered that the good person that's never been connected with the church in any way, can you imagine how much better they would be if they did know Christ? You see, we sometimes look at it and say, well, these people over here that are supposed to be right are way down here, and these people over here that don't know Christ are way up here. Well, you know, you look at this rough person over here that's not what they're supposed to be, this Christian that's mean and judgmental and cantankerous and all that. You know, you may not know the story of that person. You may not know what they've gone through. And you may not realize how far God has brought them on the journey to being a better person. Well, people oftentimes condemn other Christians. And you know what? We're bad. Christian people, I say we. That's painting with a broad brush. It may not apply to you at all, but sometimes we feel the need to tear down other Christians. I wish we didn't do that. I wish we were never tempted to do that. But sometimes we tear down other Christians ourselves, we being Christians, tear them down to somehow or another make ourselves feel better about ourselves. You know, we know deep down that we're not what we're supposed to be, so we find somebody that we can tear down and make less than us, so we can say, you know, we're at least better than them. Now, if we do that, we ought to not get overly upset when the people of the world hold us to a higher standard and are constantly pointing out our faults. They're trying to feel better about themselves because, you see, I believe this. I believe that God has put eternity in the hearts of every person. I believe that there is this concept that we are born with, that there is a higher power that created everything and that we are to serve Him. And I believe that that truth is there and people suppress it. You remember in Romans chapter 1 where it talks about the decline of the Gentiles and their level of morality, how they change from bad to worse to even worse, and just keep going down and down. And the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1 says that this evidence that there is a God is right in front of them every day. It's creation. So they know that there's a God, but they're constantly suppressing the truth. They keep pushing it down, and every time they let go of it, it comes back up. It's facing them. They just keep pushing it down, and they don't want God in their lives. And so they're wrestling with this truth that they know exists, that there's a God and that there is a right and that there is a wrong, and they're supposed to be obeying it. But to do their own thing, they occupy their time by salving their conscience, by tearing Christian people down and say, well, I'm not as good as some of them, but the church is filled with hypocrites. I've been talking a pretty good bit with a man, and I don't mind. I'm sorry to say this, but it's the truth. This man has lived a horrible life. He's lived a horrible life. I could enumerate all of his sins, and there are many. He doesn't deny one of them, but here's how he justifies a lot of stuff that he does or has done. I don't care which preacher I bring up that he's known in his life, every one of them is a hypocrite. Every one of them. Now the real issue is he's lived a horrible life and he's trying to justify it. Although there's possibility that a couple of the preachers that I brought up, he may know something on them that would put them in that hypocrite category. But recently he was telling me about a business deal that he was in on. And in that business deal, he tried to do the right thing. And I think anybody that would have listened to his side of the story, you would have said, well, it was a fair deal. He made money. Somebody lost money in the process. But all in all, it was a fair deal. He didn't try to mislead. He didn't try to cheat. It just worked. A person had something to sell. He bought it, turned around and sold it. He gave them exactly what they asked for. He turned around and sold it and made a profit. The person found out that he made a big profit off of it, and they were mad. I said, that is business, and you got to make money off stuff that you're reselling, and so everybody pretty much is going to say that was a pretty fair business deal. And I said to this fellow who's always finding fault with every preacher, I said, but I want you to think about something and get back with me on it. If I'd have done that, if I'd have been the one that carried out this business deal where I bought something and gave them exactly what they asked for it, and I turned around and I sold it, what would people say about me? I said, you don't even have to answer. They would say I was a hypocrite. that I was taking advantage of people, that I was a crooked preacher or a greedy preacher. Now, I don't have a business bone in my body, so Leanne can tell you, if you need to sell something and you want to get more than it's worth, come to me, and I'll manage to lose money. Now, Derek Fletcher understands that, so I buy all my cars through him. He takes care of me. He's not taking advantage of me. He's not charging me more. He's helped me out. He knows that I'm an inept business person. And I don't deny that. That's true. But isn't it strange that you put a Christian or a Christian leader in a certain position and they do exactly what would be judged by the world to be fair and just, but if the Christian does it and profits from it, they're being greedy and they're being a hypocrite. So maybe sometimes we're not fair in our judgment of people. I think about the psalmist David. He messed up, didn't he? I mean, he messed up royally. That's a funny word there. But it fits, doesn't it? He messed up in a major way. He did some horrific things. Now, at some point, we'll say when David is around 70 years old, or if he's even passed away, and you were to go to the local, we'll put it way after David is dead, and we'll go to the local synagogue or the local the temple that Solomon his son built, and you go there and you're a worshiper, and they hand you, they wouldn't hand you a psalm book, you would have to memorize it. They probably did line singing where the reader would sing a line and the congregation would respond with that line. That way everybody would hear the words and then be able to repeat the words. That's the way a lot of singing has been done before we had song books and PowerPoint. And by the way, it actually sounds beautiful, and I wouldn't mind us trying it sometime. But the song leader, as we call him, would sing a line. First he'd say a line, then he'd sing a line, and then the congregation would come along. And so the song director gets up and he says, today we're going to sing Psalms 99. I don't know who wrote that one. You have to go look it up. And you're sitting there and you say, I'm not singing that. That was written by a hypocrite. I don't know why God made ragweed. I think it is of the devil. Would you be right in saying David was a hypocrite? I'm not going to sing that song was written by a hypocrite. Well, you might ought to read that Psalms 51 where David confesses his sins. And you might ought to remember that David was the man after God's own heart, that David did sin and he was hypocritical. But that doesn't mean he was always a hypocrite. And there are times that you as a Christian will struggle and you'll make the bad choices, but that doesn't mean you're a hypocrite. But you do need to strive to live a good life, a perfect life, and you need to strive. Now, this is the theme of this lesson. You need to strive to be an authentic Christian, genuine. And what does that mean? It means that you're striving to please God. And if you happen to please man, that's a bonus. But you're not worried about that. You're striving to please God. In Matthew chapter 6, you know this passage that we all do. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. Now, it's interesting. There's a lot of things going on here, and I'm going to come back probably soon and deal with this, or at least hope to. But righteousness does involve outward acts of worship and devotion. And I want to say that the acts of worship, because the things that he's talking about are acts of worship. That's part of righteousness. But he says, beware, be careful that you don't get into this thing of worshiping to try to impress people. And then he says, okay, now when you give to the needy, don't be like the hypocrites. Don't make sure everybody knows that you have given to the needy. I heard a preacher the other day. He told this neat little story. This goes back a ways. He was in seminary, and he was struggling to get by, and his mother and dad had limited resources, and he said he was living off peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And that is an inexpensive meal, but it gets older after a while. But he was living off of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and one day he was just, he was so tired of that, but he didn't have any money. And one day he received a letter that was unmarked, and he opened it up, and there was $35 in it. And he said, and this was 30 or 40 years after the fact, he said, to this day, I have no idea who sent me that money. Now, isn't that a wonderful way to reach out to people and to bless them? But there are some people, he says, that when they want to give, they want everybody to know they gave. Well, if you're doing that so people around you will know you gave, then you're doing it to please men and not to please God. And Jesus uses that language. It sounds strange to us because when I was a little kid, I remember we took everything literally, and I remember the preacher preaching on this and saying, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. And I'm sitting there in the pew trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to hide my right hand. It don't work that way, literally, does it? He's just saying, don't put on a show. Be authentic. Give. Do the right thing. But it's between you and God. Then he goes on, he talks about when you pray. And he talks about this one at length, and that's where we have the Lord's Prayer. But anyway, he said, when you pray, don't be one of these people that go out here and try to impress people with all the phrases that you can come up with, all the cliches that you use, flowery language. He says, when you pray, talk to God. And it would be an honor. It would be an honor to go and pray at, say, the state capitol, the U.S. Capitol, while we still are allowed to do such a thing. And to be called on it, and that would be such a nerve-wracking thing to realize that you're standing before the leaders of America, and you're maybe going to it's going to be put in the Constitution. It's going to be put in not the Constitution. It'll be put in the congressional record or the archives of the state. Your prayer, it's going to be there. And if you say something wrong, there's probably some press member there who doesn't have his head or her head bowed. They're writing down what you say. And if you say something wrong, and you're up there and you're praying and you're thinking about all of this, you're thinking about the wrong things, Jesus said. You're not praying to impress people. You're to talk to God when you pray. And in fact, it's better to go to your closet and just talk to God. And maybe not enough of us take advantage of that privilege. And when you fast, don't do like the hypocrites, he says. Don't go around here with your face all colored up so everybody knows something's wrong, and dress in your ragged clothes and go around holding your stomach and saying, oh, I'm so hungry. Why don't you eat? Well, I'm just fasting for the Lord. No, they're not fasting for the Lord. They're fasting to win the approval of people. What Jesus wants you to do is He says if you fast, and by the way, it's a discipline, a spiritual discipline I think the church sorely needs to practice, including myself, especially myself. Jesus says, when you fast, wash your face, put on your good clothes, don't let people know. And when your stomach growls, don't make sure everybody else has heard it. Did you hear my stomach growl? By the way, I always am scared of microphones because sometimes I hear my stomach growling. I don't want you to, and it's in close proximity to the mic. But he said, fast. And when your stomach growls, remember that Jesus went into the wilderness and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And that the devil tempted him. Remember, connect with Jesus in that moment. When you fast, remember that there are people in this world who are starving, and there are children that are starving to death, and there are people living in our own country that if they don't have enough food, they have too much of the wrong kind of food. And here we are with the luxury of choosing the time and place when we go without. We get to choose. And just reflect on things like that, and reflect on as the fact that as your body is hungry for food, your soul ought to be hungry for God. But that's between you and God. It's not supposed to be something that you do so people will approve of you. But in our society, you see, the people that Jesus is talking to be revered and to be respected and to be welcomed in, meant that you were to be religious and devout. If you were a tax collector and sinner, you're on the outside. But in our world, it's we'll call it a contemporary hypocrisy. In our world, people try to be a little bit rebellious to fit in, to win the approval of people. Folks, I probably shouldn't tell some of these things, but I remember the first time that I said a curse word around my friends at school. It was like the 4th grade. I remember the exact location. And I know why I did it. I did it to fit in. I did it to please men. Now, inside I was dying. I knew that I had done wrong. I lost something. I'm not making these things up, folks. Maybe I've got to, some people say I can't sleep at night because I got a bad conscience. You're right. My question is how do you sleep? But anyway, that's just playing there. I remember when I was in 2nd grade, sitting on a bus with a guy that I went to school with and went to church. Well, of course I went to school with him. I was sitting on the bus with him. But I went to church with him. We grew up together. We shared the same last name, no relation. And I'm sitting there on the bus, and these 2 older guys were asking us if we knew what this filthy word, what the meaning of it was. And my friend was in the 1st grade, and he had grown up in a good Christian home, and he didn't know what it meant, and they thought that was so funny, and so they turned to me. I'm sitting there hoping they won't ask me, because I did grow up going to church, but I knew what the word meant. And I remember sitting there embarrassed, and I gave them the wrong answer intentionally to support my friend here that was still good and pure. But by the 4th grade, I was selling out to win the approval of people. See, a contemporary hypocrite likes to see how far they can go, and they'll do sometimes what they have to do even though they're dying on the inside. And by the way, that is a literal truth. They're dying spiritually on the inside every time they cross over and do things to win the approval of the world. It's the teenager that says ugly words to fit in. It's the adult who goes out in a business setting and everybody's drinking, and so you don't want to come across as some kind of stick in the mud Christian, and so you guzzle it down. Why? To fit in. And you just don't like it. But you know what? You all know how this works. If you do it enough, it will stop bothering you. We don't want to be a hypocrite. We want to live authentic lives. And the only way we can do that is we purpose within ourselves that what we're really trying to do is please God. That's our goal. Now that's a hard goal to stay focused on because we all want to be loved and appreciated. We want to be accepted. We want to feel like a part of something. And I'm going to tell you that you can have both. If you focus on pleasing God, God will provide you with a group that accepts you and supports you. It's called the church, which happens to have a few hypocrites. But it's still His family. You say, well, I'm not as impressed with being accepted by the church as I am being accepted by my peers at school or my peers at workplace. Then friend, you're in a lot of trouble. You don't want to face God with that mentality. Because God will say to those who didn't want to know Him, who didn't want to please Him, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. You didn't want to know me. I didn't know you. There's a little incident that happened in my life. It's been a long time ago now, a long time ago, that just really stuck with me. I've probably told it here before. But I was out in a little town out in Fort Cobb, Oklahoma, preaching in a gospel meeting out there. And one of the elders of the church had a lovely little girl who had Down syndrome. And we were over to his house in the afternoon when she got home from school, and her name was Jade. And it was picture day at school, and they had dressed Jade up. Joy, she was just as cute as a button. And I commented, I said, Jade, you look so pretty today. I said, you just are beautiful. And Jade turned to her daddy and she said, Daddy, do I look pretty? You see, that little girl with Down syndrome exhibited something that we all need. She didn't care what I said. She wanted to know what her father thought. That's the way we ought to live. Driving force, we want to please her Father. If anybody needs to respond to the invitation, we offer it as you can come as we stand and sing together.